Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to briefly introduce the big themes of Era 4, our next unit, and the first topic, which is Jeffersonianism. So let's get started. There are three major themes to our next unit. Era 4 covers 1800 to 1848. And the first theme really revolves around politics and power. It is a period of nationalism in the United States, a general period of expansion with challenges to federal authority, national authority, with the expansion of rights to some, while also severely contracting rights of minorities and enslaved Africans. These political differences will develop along regions, areas in the country, which will lead to the creation of the second party system. New political parties are going to form. The second theme revolves around the economy, and the big economic development that's happening is what historians call the market revolution. A big change, right? A revolution in technology and transportation. This is where you're going to have the very beginnings of factory production and railroads, innovations in transportation. These things are going to bring massive changes to societies, including organization of the family, the type of work people are doing, and immigration. The changes in the market revolution will help inform the development of regional identities within the United States and the dependence on and solidify enslaved labor and the need for cotton in the South. The final theme is around society, and it's a period of social reform. And the period of social reform is really reactionary. One, to these big political and economic changes that are happening, and also a new religious movement in the United States, which historians call the Second Great Awakening. So Americans are reacting to these things, and new ideas are going to spring up, and we have the formation of new religious movements and reform movements, trying to improve society and also align and live within the ideals of America and putting them into reality. Era 4 is sometimes called the antebellum era. It's the period before the Civil War. Antebellum is actually a Latin word, which breaks up into ante, before, and bellum referring to war or conflict. So we're really looking at, as you can see on this timeline, the early antebellum period, 1800 to 1848-ish is our official stopping point. But you can see here on top, you have various political topics. So the War of 1812, Jacksonian democracy, and the era of the common man we'll be talking about later this unit. All across the bottom, there's that gray arrow going from left to right, and the economic market revolution is still happening throughout this entire time period. The election of 1800 brought the election of Thomas Jefferson as the third president of the United States, and the start of nearly 30 years of dominance in the White House by Democratic Republicans. So we really see the decline of the Federalists, the collapse of the party by 1815, and then the election of James Monroe and later John Quincy Adams, both of the Democratic Party, by the 1830s. Last bit for a little bit of an overview is the United States is expanding both in population and in physical space. So population, look at the graph on the left-hand side. In a single decade, 10 years, the United States grew by 2 million people. Right? By 1820, just 50 years after the start of the American Revolution in 1770, the United States population has grown by over 6-7 million. That is a drastic significance and increase in the U.S. population. The United States is also expanding physically, so Americans are moving and purchasing land in what is the frontier or the West, and that's the green areas in Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee, right? They're moving past the Appalachian Mountains and moving closer and closer to the Mississippi River, which is right here, separating Illinois and Mississippi, right? This vertical line going down to the Port of New Orleans. After the War of 1812, Americans really flood into the West, and by 1840, 1/3 of the American population live in the West, which would be none of the original 13 colonies. They're in the new areas that are being added. So we have the election of Thomas Jefferson, and I want you to pause here and read this slide from his inaugural address when he was sworn in as president. His inaugural address is famous because of this quote, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." His first inaugural address, he really makes a concerted effort, a deliberate effort to unite the country given the turmoil of the last 4 years under John Adams's presidency, and in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts and so forth. The second part of his inaugural address really lays out his vision for America, the essential principles of our government. He wants to pay down the debt. He wants to encourage agriculture, farming, and notice he follows up and says commerce as its handmaid, as the assistant, as the servant to agriculture, right? So he's placing agriculture above Hamilton's vision for a trading manufacturing vision. And then he also espouses ideas of the Enlightenment and civil liberties, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of person, and so forth. So how do we remember things about Thomas Jefferson? Well, you can think of it as Thomas Jefferson is, of course, smelly. These are just, it's a quick way to remember key components of Jefferson's policies and major events during his presidency. So the first one is small government. Remember, he is an advocate of states' rights. That's because he's a Democratic Republican. And he's very fearful of a large federal government. So he does take some steps to decrease the size of the national government, but he reduces the size of the military, the Army and the Navy. He does eliminate some federal jobs he thought were unnecessary. He also repealed the excise taxes, especially the one on whiskey. That was part of Hamilton's economic plan. And he did pay down the national debt. But the thing that's really interesting, especially related to foreign policy, is that he maintained the neutrality policies of Washington and Adams. Kind of being at the helm of political power, as the commander-in-chief, I think Jefferson is a lot more wary of the potential pitfalls and the consequences of bringing the United States into a war or continued conflict on the oceans. And remember, he's also generally in favor of states' rights. Marbury versus Madison is something that we'll discuss next class in more detail. For right now, the most important thing is that Marbury v. Madison established judicial review, the ability to declare laws unconstitutional. E stands for the Embargo Act of 1807. So for some context, by 1800, Napoleon has crowned himself Emperor of France, and the French empire, so to speak, is massive. It has conquered parts of Austria and Italy and Spain. Napoleon actually puts his brother Joseph on the throne of Spain. The French are actually expanding rapidly. And so the wars and the effects of the French Revolution haven't stopped. And in fact, they've continued. Both France and Great Britain want the United States as an ally. But Britain and France are like mortal enemies right now. They are fighting each other to the teeth. And impressment continues and expands. The impressment of American sailors, right, by both the French and the British navies, pressing them into service, forcing them to serve the British or the French Navy, continues and gets even worse. Jefferson avoids war with France despite these challenges to neutrality, and he does assert that. One way to try and avoid the possibility of impressment of U.S. sailors is the Embargo Act. The Embargo Act literally banned U.S. ships from sailing into any foreign port. Any foreign port. All U.S. ships. So the Embargo Act basically said, we're not going to trade with anyone, especially the British, because that was the United States' still #1 trading partner. The result of the Embargo Act is that it actually cripples the U.S. economy, and it's an utter failure. There's a famous political cartoon that you can see on the left-hand side, and we're going to talk about that cartoon in more detail in a later class. It is eventually repealed 2 years later. The most famous part of Jefferson's presidency are the 2 L's, and that would be the Louisiana Purchase. He buys the Louisiana Territory, you can see highlighted, from France in order to eliminate foreign control, either Spain or France, controlling the Mississippi River, gaining the large port at New Orleans, and keeping the United States an agricultural nation, right, by purchasing a massive amount of land that is going to double the size of the United States. Napoleon sold it to the United States for $15 US, which is around 3 cents an acre. However, Jefferson runs into a problem because the Constitution does not literally say the United States can buy land from other countries. There's no clause that says it. And so Jefferson is in this constitutional conundrum that's an opposite of what he did and viewed the Bank of the United States. But Jefferson says, I'm going to read the treaty-making powers of the United States very broadly, because isn't purchasing land with another country just also a treaty? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So he starts to view the Constitution and the Elastic Clause as an expansive power, a loose interpretation of the Constitution, in order to facilitate and further his vision of the agrarian nation. Right? The effects. Number 1, it removes France from the North America permanently, secures the agricultural vision, and it increases tensions with Native American groups, because the Native Americans still preferred having and trading with the French than Americans, who were purchasing and stealing the land, whereas the French were always just using them as trading networks. I'll have this video linked. It's a really great overview, and there's some good visuals with it in the slides. But we're going to skip it for now. The last piece is Lewis and Clark expedition. This was done to explore the Louisiana Territory that was bought after the Louisiana Purchase. It helped increase scientific knowledge of the region and stronger claims to the Oregon Territory, which is on the west coast. The last piece is the yeoman farmer. The yeoman farmer is a group of educated, independent landowners who are civically minded and independent, who cultivate their own land. And that was his vision for America.